In the heart of Florence, where ancient stones whisper secrets of forgotten love, young Marco Benedetti swept marble dust from his calloused hands. The workshop of Master Giuliano had been his world for 3 years now, yet tonight felt different. The air itself seemed charged with an energy he couldn't quite name. Marco had arrived in Florence as a country boy with nothing but raw talent and burning ambition. His family had been poor farmers who could barely afford to feed their children, let alone send one away to apprentice with a master sculptor. But Marco's gift had been undeniable from childhood, creating such lifelike faces that village elders swore the statues watched them with knowing eyes. When Master Giuliano passed through their village searching for new apprentices, he had immediately recognized Marco's extraordinary potential. The 3 years of apprenticeship had been grueling beyond anything Marco could have imagined. Master Giuliano was a perfectionist who demanded nothing less than absolute excellence from his students. Many apprentices had quit within the first few months, unable to endure the long hours and harsh criticism. But Marco had persevered because he understood something fundamental about art, that true mastery required sacrifice. Every calloused finger, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt and frustration was an investment in becoming something greater than he had been. The grandfather clock in the corner struck 11 as Marco put the finishing touches on his secret project. Hidden beneath a canvas in the darkest corner of the workshop stood his masterpiece, a sculpture unlike anything he had ever attempted. Her face emerged from the pristine white marble with such delicate beauty that visitors often gasped when they first glimpsed her. Marco had named her Lunaria, after the moon that provided his only light during those countless midnight hours of carving. The name seemed to capture her ethereal quality perfectly. The marble he had chosen for this sculpture was special, a rare piece from the Carrara quarries that seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. Master Giuliano had been saving it for his own work, but Marco had secretly purchased it with money saved from selling small sculptures at the market. Creating Lunaria had been unlike any artistic experience Marco had known before. Usually, he would sketch designs carefully before touching chisel to stone, planning every detail with mathematical precision. But with Lunaria, his hands had seemed to move of their own accord, guided by some intuition beyond conscious thought. He had worked on her for 6 months, stealing hours late at night when the other apprentices slept. Every curve of her body spoke of perfection. Every line of her face whispered of a soul trapped within stone. Her eyes, though carved from marble, seemed to hold depths of emotion that made Marco's heart race whenever he looked upon them. Sometimes he would catch himself talking to her as he worked, sharing his dreams and fears as if she could hear and understand. The other apprentices had started to notice Marco's obsessive behavior. They would joke that he was in love with his own creation, that he spent more time with his statue than with living people. Their teasing stung because it contained more truth than Marco wanted to admit. He knew his attachment to the sculpture wasn't entirely healthy. Normal artists maintained professional distance from their work, treating it as craft rather than passion. But Lunaria felt different. She felt like destiny carved in stone, like something he was meant to create, even if he didn't understand why. Marco's fellow apprentice, Antonio, had tried to warn him that Master Giuliano would be furious if he discovered the unauthorized project. The master's workshop operated on strict rules, and creating personal works on the premises was explicitly forbidden until an apprentice graduated to journeyman status. But Marco couldn't stop himself. Every night, he was drawn back to Lunaria, as if she were calling to him across the boundary between stone and spirit. His rational mind told him this was madness, but his heart insisted that completing her was the most important thing he would ever do. Master Giuliano had forbidden his apprentices from working on personal projects, but Marco couldn't resist. Something deep within his soul compelled him to create her, as if she already existed somewhere and was calling out to be freed. The other apprentices had long since departed for their beds, leaving Marco alone with his beloved creation. He traced his finger along her marble cheek, wondering why his heart ached with such longing for something that could never be real. As the clock's hands moved closer to midnight, a strange energy seemed to fill the air. The candles flickered without any breeze, and the shadows danced across Lunaria's marble features in ways that made them appear almost alive. The workshop grew unnaturally quiet as the final seconds before midnight ticked away. Even the usual sounds of the city seemed to fade, leaving only the thunderous beating of Marco's heart echoing in the darkness around him. When the clock struck 12, something magical happened that would change Marco's life forever. The marble beneath his fingertips grew warm, pulsing with a life force that defied all understanding of the natural world. Lunaria's chest began to rise and fall with gentle breathing. Her marble skin softened to the texture of warm flesh, and her eyes fluttered open to reveal depths of sapphire blue that sparkled like stars in the candlelight. Marco stumbled backward, his mind struggling to process what his eyes were witnessing. The woman he had lovingly carved from cold stone was sitting up, stretching her arms as if awakening from a long, peaceful sleep. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice like music floating through the quiet workshop. Her gaze fell upon Marco with curiosity and something that looked remarkably like recognition, as if she had been dreaming of him. I am Marco," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I created you. But this is impossible. Statues don't come to life. I must be dreaming, or perhaps I've finally gone completely mad." Lunaria smiled, and that smile illuminated the entire workshop more brilliantly than a dozen candles ever could. She stood gracefully, her marble white skin glowing softly in the darkness. Every movement fluid and natural despite her supernatural origins. "You gave me life through your love," she explained, stepping closer to him. "Your heart called out to mine across the boundary between stone and flesh. I have been waiting in the marble for someone who could love me enough to set me free." Marco reached out tentatively, his hand trembling as it touched her face. Her skin was warm and soft, more real than anything he had ever experienced. Yet there was something ethereal about her, as if she existed in a realm between dreams and reality. As the night hours passed, Marco and Lunaria walked through the moonlit workshop, talking softly about art, about dreams, about the strange miracle that had brought them together. Her laughter was like silver bells, filling the space with joy Marco had never known. She examined his other works with the eye of someone who understood the soul of art. Her insights amazed him, revealing depths of understanding that seemed to come from somewhere beyond normal human experience. "You have a gift that goes beyond mere technical skill," she told him, as they stood before one of his earlier works. "You carve with your heart, not just your hands. That's why you were able to give me life." But as the eastern sky began to show the faintest hint of dawn, Lunaria's expression grew troubled. She glanced toward the windows with something that looked like fear, and her hand tightened around his with increasing urgency. "What's wrong?" Marco asked, noticing how her skin seemed to be growing paler. Though he had thought that impossible, given her marble-white complexion. There was something changing about her, something that filled him with dread. "I can only exist in darkness," she whispered, her voice growing fainter as the sky continued to lighten. "When the sun rises, I must return to stone. That is the nature of the magic that binds us together." Marco's heart shattered at these words. "No," he said desperately, "there must be a way. Magic that can bring you to life once can surely let you stay alive always. I won't lose you now that I've found you." As the first ray of sunlight crept through the workshop windows, Lunaria's transformation back to marble began. Her skin hardened, her breathing slowed, and the spark of life in her eyes began to fade back into carved stone. "Every night at midnight, when darkness claims the world, I will return to you," she promised. "Our love will bloom in shadows, growing stronger with each passing evening. Love finds a way." Marco spent the entire day in a daze, unable to concentrate on his regular apprentice duties. Master Giuliano scolded him repeatedly for his clumsy mistakes and distracted behavior, but Marco barely heard the criticism through his overwhelming anticipation for midnight. When evening finally arrived, Marco prepared the workshop carefully, lighting candles in strategic positions to create the most beautiful ambience possible. If their time together was limited to the hours between midnight and dawn, he was determined to make every moment magical. As 11:30 approached, Marco found himself pacing nervously around Lunaria's statue, studying every detail of her marble features. Had he imagined the whole experience? Was he suffering from some sort of artistic madness brought on by too many solitary hours? But when the clock struck midnight once again, the miracle repeated itself. Marble transformed to flesh, stone became warm and yielding, and Lunaria opened her sapphire eyes to gaze upon him with joy that made his heart soar. "You came back," Marco whispered, hardly daring to believe his eyes. He had spent the entire day convincing himself that the previous night had been an elaborate dream, but here she stood before him, more beautiful than ever. That night, they talked for hours about everything and nothing. Marco shared stories of his childhood in the countryside, his dreams of becoming a master sculptor, and his fears that he might never be good enough to achieve true artistic greatness. Lunaria listened with the kind of attention that made Marco feel like the most important person in the world. She asked thoughtful questions and offered insights that revealed depths of wisdom he could understand in someone so newly alive. "Where do your thoughts come from?" Marco asked as they sat together among his sculptures. "You speak as if you've lived a full life, yet you were born from marble only yesterday. How do you know so much about the world?" Lunaria smiled mysteriously, her fingers tracing patterns in the marble dust that covered the workshop floor. "When you carved me, you poured more than skill into the stone. Your dreams, your hopes, your understanding of beauty and love, all of that became part of me." As their nights together continued, Marco began to notice something troubling. While Lunaria's transformation from stone to flesh at midnight was instantaneous, her return to marble at dawn seemed to be happening earlier each time. The magic that sustained her was weakening with each passing day. On their first night, she had remained flesh and blood until the sun's rays actually entered the workshop. On the second night, she had begun to transform back when the sky first showed signs of lightning. By their 10th night together, she could only stay flesh for 3 hours before the marble reclaimed her. Marco kept detailed notes, desperate to understand the pattern and find some way to slow or reverse the decline. He measured the exact time of each transformation, recorded the ambient temperature and moon phase, searched for any variable he could control to extend their precious time together. Lunaria watched him with sad understanding, knowing that his scientific approach wouldn't solve a problem that existed beyond the realm of natural law. The magic that animated her was consuming itself, burning brighter and faster with each cycle, like a candle melting away. "There's something I need to tell you," Lunaria said on their 12th night, her voice heavy with sorrow. "The magic that gives me life draws from a finite source. Each night I awaken, each moment I remain flesh, depletes that source a little more. Eventually, there will be nothing left." Marco felt panic rising in his chest. "How long?" he demanded. "How many nights do we have left? There must be something we can do, some way to replenish the magic or find a new source of power." Lunaria shook her head gently. "I don't know how long. Perhaps 20 more nights, perhaps only 10. The magic is unpredictable, responding to forces neither of us can see or control. What I do know is that our time is limited, and we must make peace with that truth." But Marco absolutely refused to accept this fate. The thought of losing Lunaria filled him with a desperation that bordered on madness. She had awakened something in him that went far beyond simple love. She had given his life meaning and purpose beyond anything he had known before. "Is something wrong?" he asked, trying to keep the panic from his voice. "You seem to be changing back sooner each night, are you? Are you losing the ability to stay with me?" Lunaria's expression grew sad, confirming his worst fears. "The magic that binds us is beautiful but fragile," she admitted. "Each transformation takes something from me. I don't know how many nights we have together. The force that gave me consciousness is like a reservoir that empties a little more each time I cross from stone to flesh." Marco felt his world crumbling around him. "There has to be something we can do," he said desperately. "What if I take you away from here? What if we travel to places where night lasts longer? In the far north, I've heard there are lands where winter brings months of continuous darkness. Running won't change the nature of what I am," Lunaria replied gently, though her eyes showed appreciation for his willingness to try anything. "I am a creature of magic, bound by laws we don't fully understand. Geography and season make no difference to supernatural forces. We must treasure each moment we have, rather than waste them fighting what cannot be changed." But Marco refused to accept defeat so icily. He was an artist, trained to see problems as challenges to be solved through creativity and determination. If the magic was failing, then he would find new magic. If the force animating Lunaria was depleting, he would discover a way to replenish it. During the days when Lunaria was stone, Marco researched everything he could find about magic, about legends of living statues, about ways to break supernatural curses or enhance magical gifts. He became a familiar figure in Florence's oldest libraries and dustiest bookshops. He visited the city's oldest libraries, spoke with scholars of ancient history, and even sought out rumored practitioners of the mystical arts. Most dismissed him as a madman whose grief over a lost love had driven him to delusion, but a few listened with interest to his desperate tale, intrigued by the specific details he provided. One elderly professor of classical studies told him about ancient Greek legends of Pygmalion, whose statue of Galatea had been brought to life by the goddess Aphrodite. But these were just stories, the professor insisted. Myths meant to teach moral lessons, rather than historical accounts of actual events. Marco listened politely, but dismissed the professor's skepticism. He knew what he had experienced with Lunaria was real. The warmth of her skin, the intelligence in her eyes, the depth of their conversations. None of that could be explained as mere fantasy or artistic obsession. An elderly woman who claimed to be a hedge, which told him that such magic always came with a price. The boundary between life and death is not meant to be crossed lightly, she warned. Your statue woman exists in violation of natural law, but there must be a way to make it permanent, Marco pleaded. If love brought her to life, shouldn't love be able to keep her alive? What kind of cruel magic gives you everything you've ever wanted, only to tear it away? The witch steadied him with eyes that seemed far older than her wrinkled face. Perhaps the question is not how to keep her in your world, she said cryptically, but whether you are willing to join her in her own world instead. Marco didn't understand what she meant, but her words haunted him through the long, lonely days of waiting for midnight. What sacrifice would he make to be with Lunaria forever? What price would be too high to pay for eternal love? Meanwhile, his relationship with Lunaria deepened with each precious night they shared. They developed their own language of glances and touches, their own rituals and private jokes. She would help him work on his sculptures, her ethereal beauty inspiring him to create art beyond anything he had previously imagined. You've found your true calling, Lunaria told him one night as they admired his latest creation, a sculpture of a mother cradling her child with such tender realism that clients had wept upon seeing it. Your art now carries the spark of life itself. Even when I'm gone, a part of me will live on in everything you create. My essence will flow through your hands into the marble forever. Don't talk about being gone, Marco said sharply, his voice harder than he intended. The fear of losing her made him occasionally harsh, desperate to control the uncontrollable. I won't let that happen. I'm going to find a way to keep you with me forever, no matter what it takes. There has to be something more powerful than the magic that's stealing you away. I refuse to accept that we were brought together only to be torn apart. Lunaria reached up to touch his face with her marble-pale hand, her expression filled with love and sadness in equal measure. Marco, my dearest love, you cannot control magic through force of will alone. Some things in this universe are beyond even the most devoted heart's power to change. As their 15th night together progressed, Marco could see that Lunaria was weaker than ever before. Her form was less solid, flickering between marble and flesh like a candle fighting against the wind. He knew their time was running out, that within days, or perhaps only hours, she might not return at all. The urgency drove him to a decision he had been avoiding. In his research, he had discovered references to an ancient ritual in a tome so old its pages crumbled at his touch. The ritual could permanently bind a spirit to the physical world, but it required a sacrifice that made his blood run cold. I've found a way, Marco announced when she awakened that night. He had discovered an ancient ritual that might permanently bind a spirit to the physical world, but it required a sacrifice that made his blood run cold to contemplate. The ritual demanded that the person seeking to preserve magical life must offer their own life force in exchange. Not death, but something perhaps worse, the gradual transfer of his mortal essence to sustain her supernatural existence. What way? Lunaria asked, though something in her expression suggested she already feared his answer. Her supernatural intuition seemed to warn her that Marco had discovered something dangerous. something that would exact a terrible price. Marco explained the ritual he had learned from an ancient tome. As he spoke, he watched Lunaria's face grow pale with horror, her ethereal beauty marked by an expression of profound anguish. "No," she said firmly, "I forbid you to even consider such a thing. You would sacrifice your humanity, your mortal life, your future, everything that makes you who you are, just to preserve my existence. What good is my humanity without you?" Marco demanded. "What value does my mortal life have if I must spend it alone, knowing I had the chance to save you and chose not to take it?" Lunaria moved to the window, staring out at the night sky with tears streaming down her marble-white cheeks. "You don't understand what you're offering to give up," she whispered. "A mortal life, however brief, burns with an intensity that no magical existence can match." But Marco had already made his decision. The next day, while Master Giuliano was away on business, Marco gathered the materials needed for the ritual: ancient candles, herbs that had to be harvested under specific moon phases, and a dagger that legend claimed had mystical properties. He arranged everything in a circle around Lunaria's statue, following the precise instructions he had memorized from the forbidden text. The ritual had to begin at 11:45, giving the magic time to take hold before midnight awakened Lunaria's consciousness. As the appointed time arrived, Marco lit the candles and began the incantation. The words felt strange and heavy on his tongue, as if they carried the weight of centuries. The air in the workshop grew thick and electric, charged with supernatural energy. At first, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, Marco began to feel a pulling sensation, as if something invisible was drawing his life force out through his fingertips and into the marble of Lunaria's statue. When midnight struck and Lunaria awakened, she immediately sensed what Marco had done. She sobbed, throwing her arms around him. "Oh, Marco, what have you done to yourself? I can feel it. Your life force is tied to mine now. You've doomed yourself to fade away so that I can remain solid." Marco felt weak but triumphant. "I've saved us," he said, though his voice was already thinner than before. "Now you can stay with me forever. We don't have to lose each other when dawn comes." But even as he spoke, Marco could feel the terrible truth of what he had done. His mortal essence was slowly draining away, feeding the magic that kept Lunaria alive. He had, perhaps months before, he would be nothing more than an empty shell. "You don't understand," Lunaria wept. "I can feel your life force flowing into me with every breath I take. Every moment I remain flesh and blood is now stealing something irreplaceable from you. How can I be happy knowing that my existence is killing you?" The dawn came and went, but Lunaria remained in her human form. The ritual had worked. She was no longer bound by the cycle of midnight transformations. But the victory felt hollow as Marco grew visibly weaker with each passing hour. Over the following days, Marco's declining health became impossible to hide. Master Giuliano noticed and insisted on calling a physician, but no medical treatment could address the supernatural drain on Marco's life force. The doctor prescribed rest, better nutrition, and fresh air, but Marco grew paler and weaker regardless. The other apprentices whispered among themselves, speculating about Marco's mysterious illness. Some thought he had contracted plague. Others believed he was suffering from a broken heart over some secret love affair. None guessed the truth that he was literally giving his life to sustain a supernatural being. Antonio, Marco's closest friend among the apprentices, confronted him one evening. Whatever is happening to you, it's killing you slowly but surely. Please, tell me what's wrong so I can help you. You're like a brother to me, Marco. I can't stand by and watch you fade away." But Marco couldn't tell the truth without revealing Lunaria's existence. He mumbled vague excuses about not sleeping well, about working too hard, about missing his family in the countryside. Antonio clearly didn't believe these explanations, but he respected Marco's privacy enough not to press further. Lunaria was tormented by guilt, watching the man she loved grow paler and more frail with each day that passed. She begged him to find a way to reverse the ritual, but Marco insisted he had no regrets about his choice, even as his hands trembled too much to hold his sculpting tools. "At least we're together," he would say, whenever she expressed her anguish, though his voice grew weaker with each repetition. "At least we have time to build a real relationship, to experience what other couples take for granted. Isn't a few months of perfect love better than a lifetime of wondering what might have been?" But Lunaria couldn't share his contentment. Every kiss they shared, every tender moment between them, was tainted by her knowledge that she was literally stealing his life with every breath she took. She began to withdraw emotionally, hoping to minimize the magical connection that was killing him. She would stand by the window for hours during their nights together, staring out at the stars while tears streamed down her marble-white cheeks. The joy that had characterized their early nights together had been replaced by a profound sorrow that hung in the air like morning fog. Late one night, while Marco slept fitfully beside her, Lunaria made a choice that would save them both, though neither would escape unscathed. She remembered the witch's cryptic words about joining her in her world rather than keeping her in his, using knowledge that seemed to flow from the ancient marble that had originally formed her body. Lunaria began working on a sculpture of her own. She had never held sculpting tools before, but her supernatural connection to stone guided her hands. Night after night, while Marco grew weaker, Lunaria secretly worked on her creation. She was carving a perfect likeness of Marco himself, pouring all of her love and magical energy into the marble. When her sculpture of Marco was finally complete, Lunaria prepared for the most difficult decision of her brief life. She would reverse the flow of magical energy, sending Marco's life force into the marble while using her own essence to complete the transformation. On what she knew would be their last night together as beings of flesh and blood, Lunaria finally revealed her plan to Marco. His reaction was exactly what she had feared: rage, denial, and desperate attempts to dissuade her. "You can't do this," Marco said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I won't let you sacrifice yourself to save me. That's not what I wanted when I performed the ritual." "And we will be together," Lunaria replied softly, her hand resting on the marble sculpture of Marco. "Just not in the way either of us originally imagined. We'll exist as beings of living stone, conscious and aware, able to love each other without the constraints of mortal flesh." "But what kind of existence is that?" he asked. "Trapped in stone, unable to touch, unable to feel the world around us. How is that different from death?" "Because we'll have each other," Lunaria said firmly. "Our consciousness will remain intact. Our love will survive the transformation. We'll be like the eternal lovers in ancient myths, frozen in time, but forever together." The transformation began at dawn, but this time it was different from all the others. Instead of Lunaria turning back to marble, while Marco remained flesh and blood, both of them began to change simultaneously. Their skin took on the luminous white quality, of living marble. But their eyes remained alive, conscious, filled with the love that had brought them together and would now sustain them through eternity. They were no longer fully human, no longer entirely stone, but something new, beings of living art, sculptures that breathed with supernatural life. Master Giuliano discovered them the next morning, two perfect marble statues standing embraced in the workshop. At first, he assumed Marco had completed two masterpieces before mysteriously disappearing. But something about the statues troubled him. Their eyes seemed too lifelike, their expressions too knowing, their poses too intimate to be mere artistic representation. He searched the workshop and Marco's quarters for any clue about where his apprentice had gone, but found only his tools, his sketches, and a single note that read simply, "I have found my masterpiece at last." Master Giuliano puzzled over these words for years, never understanding their true meaning. The workshop underwent subtle changes after Marco's disappearance. Other apprentices reported feeling watched when working late at night, as if unseen eyes followed their movements. Tools would sometimes appear in different places than where they had been left. Candles would light themselves when darkness fell over the statues. Master Giuliano initially wanted to sell the mysterious marble couple to recoup his losses from Marco's abandoned apprenticeship. But every potential buyer who came to view them left feeling unsettled, claiming the statues possessed an uncanny quality that made them uncomfortable. Some reported hearing whispers in the night. Others claimed the marble figures had moved slightly between visits. During the long nights, when the workshop was empty and darkness provided them with privacy, Marco and Lunaria would walk together through the familiar space. Their marble forms moved with fluid grace, and they could speak to each other in voices that sounded like distant music, audible only to each other and occasionally to those rare mortals who possessed the sensitivity to hear beyond normal perception. "Do you regret what we've become?" Lunaria asked one midnight as they stood by the window, watching the moon paint silver patterns on the workshop floor. Their marble hands were intertwined, still capable of touch and tender connection despite their transformed state. The sensation was different from when they had been flesh, but no less real. "How could I regret an eternity with you?" Marco replied, his voice carrying the same warmth it had possessed when he was fully human, though now it echoed with an otherworldly quality. "We found a way to be together forever, to love without the fear of death or separation. What more could any couple hope for? We have transcended the limitations that bind mortal lovers." Their existence as living marble was different from their previous forms, but it was not without its own unique pleasures and discoveries. They could share thoughts and emotions with an intimacy that had been impossible when they were flesh and blood. Their consciousness could merge and separate at will, allowing them to experience each other's perspectives and feelings directly. At night, when they were free to move and speak, they would share the events they had witnessed during the day. They developed elaborate games to pass the eternal hours, creating imaginary worlds and telling each other stories that spanned centuries. Their love deepened in ways that mortal couples could never experience, growing richer and more complex with each passing season. Years passed, and the workshop changed hands several times. Each new owner was fascinated by the two mysterious statues that came with the property. Art collectors offered enormous sums to purchase the statues, but every owner found themselves strangely reluctant to sell, as if parting with the marble couple would bring misfortune upon them. A wealthy merchant tried to separate the statues once, intending to display Lunaria in his villa while selling Marco to a competing collector. But that night, both statues vanished from their locations and were found the next morning back in their original embrace. The merchant took this as a supernatural warning and never attempted to separate them again. Decades turned to centuries, and the statues became legendary throughout Florence. Lovers would come to see them, believing that touching the marble hands would bless their own relationships with lasting devotion. Many claim to have heard soft whispers of encouragement when they stood before the statues during troubled times in their romances. Young couples on the verge of marriage would visit the statues to seek their blessing. And remarkably, those who made this pilgrimage seemed to have longer-lasting, happier marriages than those who didn't. Scholars tried to explain this correlation through psychology or coincidence. But Marco and Lunaria knew the truth. They actively poured their love and wisdom into the hearts of those who came seeking help. Marco and Lunaria watched the world change around them, witnessing the evolution of art, technology, and human society from their unique perspective. They saw countless couples come and go, some finding lasting love, others being torn apart by circumstances beyond their control. Each story taught them something new about the nature of love and commitment. They witnessed wars that ravaged Florence, plagues that emptied the streets, revolutions that overthrew governments. Through all of it, they remained constant to lovers frozen in eternal embrace, offering hope to those who believed in the power of transcendent love. "We've become guardians of love itself," Lunaria observed one night as they watched a young couple embrace near their base. The man having just proposed marriage. "Our story has become a symbol of what's possible when two people are willing to sacrifice everything for each other. We serve a purpose greater than our own happiness. Is that what we did?" Marco mused thoughtfully, watching the happy couple leave hand in hand, sacrifice everything. Or did we actually gain something that most people never experience? A love that truly transcends death, time, and all the barriers that usually separate souls from each other. Perhaps what looks like sacrifice from the outside is actually the greatest gift imaginable. When the workshop was finally converted into a museum dedicated to Renaissance art, Marco and Lunaria found themselves the centerpiece of the collection. Thousands of visitors came to see the eternal lovers, marveling at the unprecedented artistic skill that had created such realistic expressions of devotion. Tour guides would tell elaborate stories about the mysterious, unnamed sculptor who had created the masterpieces. During museum hours, when crowds of people admired their marble forms, Marco and Lunaria remained perfectly still and silent. But their consciousness was always active, listening to the comments of visitors, feeling touched by the emotional responses their story evoked in others. The moral lessons embedded in Marco and Lunaria's extraordinary story reach across centuries to touch modern hearts with timeless wisdom about the nature of true love and commitment. Their tale teaches us that authentic love requires more than passion or attraction. It demands sacrifice, dedication, and the willingness to choose your beloved's happiness above your own comfort. In our contemporary world of disposable relationships and instant gratification, the story of the marble lovers reminds us that lasting love is built through conscious choice rather than mere emotion. Marco and Lunaria each faced moments where they had to decide whether their love was worth tremendous personal cost. The first profound lesson we learn from their story is that true love sees beyond surface appearances to recognize the soul of the beloved. Marco fell in love not with Lunaria's physical beauty, but with the essence he sensed within the marble before she ever came to life. Their story teaches us that genuine love often requires us to make decisions that others might consider foolish or extreme. Society told Marco that pursuing a relationship with a living statue was madness. Logic suggested that Lunaria's magical existence was too unstable to build a future upon. Modern couples can learn from Marco and Lunaria's example that love is not just about being together during easy times, but about finding ways to support and protect each other when circumstances become difficult or seemingly impossible. The marble lovers also teach us about the importance of mutual sacrifice in relationships. Neither Marco nor Lunaria was willing to accept salvation at the expense of the other's destruction. Their final solution required both of them to give up their human existence. This lesson is particularly relevant for contemporary couples who often struggle to find balance between individual desires and relationship needs. Marco and Lunaria show us that true partnership sometimes requires both people to change, to grow, to become something new together. Their transformation into living marble represents the ultimate metaphor for committed love, to separate beings becoming one eternal entity while still maintaining their individual consciousness and identity. They achieved unity without losing themselves, connection without codependence. Perhaps most importantly, their story demonstrates that true love creates something beautiful that extends beyond the lovers themselves. Marco and Lunaria's sacrifice became a source of inspiration for countless other couples, proving that authentic love serves a purpose greater than personal happiness. The story of the Marble Heart's awakening challenges us to examine our own relationships and ask ourselves difficult questions. Are we willing to sacrifice for our beloved's well-being? Do we love the person's soul or just their external attributes? Are we building something together that will outlast our individual lives? In a world that often treats love as a commodity to be consumed rather than a sacred bond to be nurtured, Marco and Lunaria's story calls us back to deeper values. They remind us that real love is not about what we can get from another person, but about what we can give and become together. Their example encourages us to view challenges in our relationships not as reasons to give up, but as opportunities to demonstrate the depth of our commitment. When faced with obstacles that seem insurmountable, we can ask ourselves what creative solutions might be possible if we were willing to think beyond conventional approaches. The Marble Lover's story also teaches us about the importance of choosing love over fear. Both Marco and Lunaria faced moments when they could have chosen safety over commitment, self-preservation over sacrifice. Their willingness to risk everything for love created something miraculous that continues to inspire others centuries later. As you reflect on this timeless tale of transcendent love, consider how its lessons might apply to your own relationships. Whether you're single and searching for love, dating and building connections, or married and nurturing a long-term partnership, the wisdom of Marco and Lunaria offers guidance for creating relationships that truly last. If this story has moved you, share it with someone you love. Discuss its lessons with your partner, your friends, your family members. Let the Marble Lover's sacrifice inspire you to love more deeply, commit more fully, and create relationships that serve something greater than yourselves. Remember that every great love story begins with a choice. the choice to see beyond surface appearances, to commit despite uncertainty, to sacrifice for the beloved's happiness, and to keep choosing love even when it's difficult. Marco and Lunaria made these choices, and their love became eternal. What choices will you make for love?